So another thing that happened in 2016, of course, and for me, this was one of the enduring images of the final stages of that 2016 World Cup was the men's team coming out and celebrating with the women's team after they triumphed in the final. Talk us through the women's recent fortunes because, in 2018, they were semi-finalists, but you look back to the last World T20, quite disappointing. And the Tour of England as well, where I believe they lost 5-0.
Yeah.
So, you look at that. What do you see as the future for West Indies women's cricket, or at least in the immediate future? What do you think their fortunes are?
I mean, I think the first place to start, Jay, is probably looking at a tweet that Hayley Matthews, who was part of that 2016, in fact, I think she hit a 50 in that 2016 final.
Yep.
Hayley Matthews put out a tweet on it was the day where everyone was going 5 years since West Indies women and men won the T20 World Cup. So it was sometime earlier this week at the time of recording. And Hayley Matthews put out a tweet, like quote tweeted it, saying something to the effect of, when we won this tournament in 2016, who would have thought that we wouldn't be any further ahead in our development than then? In fact, we've gone backwards. And I think we retweeted it, and I was like, you know what, Hayley's 100% correct, because that win in 2016 was an upset win. Nobody thought West Indies was going to beat Australia in the final. Maybe a few people did, but I certainly didn't. And that win should have heralded West Indies becoming like a major world threat, regular world threat in the women's game. If anything, I'd argue that lots of teams have now taken them over. India have passed us, for sure. South Africa have passed us. And the reality of the situation is there's so many reasons behind it. But the number one reason, there's a lot of things put together, but the number one reason effectively is funding, lack of development, which links into the funding, lack of game time, lack of payment for the players. And by that, I mean, I think there's 10 to 15 players in the region are under contract as women's players. But even those contracts, they're not, to me personally, this is all my opinion, that's not even enough to justify somebody committing themselves to the game professionally. And then even if you look outside the 10, 15, we're talking about women players who are having to work and then try and get by in the game. Like it's if you treat a sport like it's semi-professional, you're going to have a semi-professional outcome, aren't you? And we basically, since 2016, have relied on 3 or 4 players to carry that team. So Hayley Matthews, Stephanie Taylor, Deandra Dottin, Anisa Mohammed, who doesn't play anymore, obviously. Melissa Aguilera was there for a while. She's obviously retired now, etc. And we basically relied, I'm thinking of Cornell as well. I'm missing out a few players as well. Yeah. But you can't, no matter, like Deandra Dottin is amazing. She's an amazing player. Hayley Matthews is very good, obviously, as is Stephanie. But all 3 of them, when you speak to them, all make the same point. There aren't enough young players coming through. So those 3 now, well, Hayley Matthews is still youngish, but they're all coming to their late 20s, right? Early 30s. But when you look to see, so who's the next lot coming through, you can't identify anybody because there aren't enough camps. Now, obviously, COVID has had an impact as well. So we've got to be honest in that COVID has limited what Cricket West Indies could do. But even before that, the same complaints were there. Not enough camps, not enough payment for the players. And remember, what also hinders West Indies is it's different islands. So what's going on in Jamaica might not be replicated in Trinidad, which might not be replicated in Barbados, which might not be replicated in Guyana. So we had an under-19 tournament in 2019, which was pretty much the last thing that went on for women's cricket in the region. And some teams didn't even field a team. Some nations, didn't even send a team. But also, like the tournaments don't last long enough, if that makes any sense. So they're not playing. There's not enough games going on. So from that tournament, that under-19 tournament in 2019, what has happened since? Well, nothing. So what has been the pathway for those players? Now, in fairness, that's all the criticisms out of the way. And Cricket West Indies know this. I think we spoke about Skerritt earlier on. Skerritt acknowledges this. He's like, we need to get our plan for women's cricket. We need to try and find a way to get it more exposure, get more camps for them. Courtney Walsh has since been named, Courtney Walsh has taken over as West Indies head coach, women's head coach in January this year. The women then had a camp in Antigua at the end of January, which went into early Feb, around time of just before Super 50 and all of that. All of the women, and Courtney himself said, but more importantly, all of the players said that that was the most valuable thing they've had in a long, long time. It was a 3-week intensive, all paid for camp for the top, I think, 20 to 30 players in the region. And they were saying that's what they need. But the problem is, since that camp, what's happened? They haven't played anyone. They haven't. I know they wanted to go and play India, but I think schedules and COVID hasn't allowed that. But we can't, like, I don't want to be in a position to you, Jay, where I'm saying, oh, brilliant, Cricket West Indies organised this camp. Courtney was able to work closely with his coaches and all of the women and identify this, that and the other. And then the next thing I say to you, and then we didn't have any games and we didn't have another camp till this time next year. Do you see what I mean? So the women's game in the region needs to have a clear structure, pathway, development, funding, everything. Otherwise, when we eventually do play again, nothing's going to change. It's still going to be, can Deandra Jottin rescue the game? Can Stephanie Taylor rescue the game? Can Hayley Matthews rescue the game? What happens when they all retire? Well, then what are we saying? So it's a mess. I know Courtney is frustrated because Courtney has said in press conferences this year he needs some games. He can only do so much with them in a camp, but he needs to see them play competitively as well. So I don't really know. It's a bit of a negative tone I'm setting there, but for me, it's what else am I supposed to say? It's almost like the truth of the situation.